Right, are we ready to start? All good? Okay, I'll do a little bit of housekeeping first. So welcome everybody, thank you for joining us tonight. For Glasgow in 2024 presents Glitterati, Glamour and the Grotesque. We will be having a little introduction, a bit of a reading, and then a chat, and I'll be posing some questions. And then I'll be welcoming questions from our lovely viewers. If you're joining us on Zoom, you can put questions into the Q&A. Our chat will be turned off, so make sure you're writing into the Q&A. And if you're joining us on YouTube, you can comment below the video and your questions will be fed through. And please feel free to live tweet on the hashtag G in 2024. So that's G for Glasgow in 2024. Wonderful. I think that's all. So now it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Oliver Langmead, or should I say Dr. Oliver Langmead, because he's just been awarded his PhD in terraforming and ecological philosophy. So the University of Glasgow. And this is a little bit surreal for me to be introducing Ollie, because I remember watching his launch of Birds of Paradise last year, and it was another online Zoom event. And now here I am hosting it for Glasgow in 2024. So it's very exciting. And Birds of Paradise is just such an interesting book. Which tells the story of Adam trying to reclaim the Garden of Eden. So would recommend that too. He's also written Dark Star, a sci-fi long-form poem, which was listed as one of the Guardian's best books of 2015. And also Metronome, which is a gorgeous book about memory and music. No, dreaming and music. Memories about Glitterati. He now teaches creative writing at the University of Glasgow, and I'm sure he's already working on some exciting genre-defying projects. We're also joined tonight by Cassandra Khaw, and I am delighted to have them here with us tonight. Cassandra's a writer who never fails to surprise, as they never do the same thing twice, and also very good at the genre-defying books. So their work spans from horror to space opera. They write short stories, novels, video games, tabletop RPGs, scripts, and much else besides. Their work has been nominated for the Locus Awards and the British Fantasy Awards. So thank you very much for joining us, Cassandra. And yeah, shall we get started?
Absolutely.
Sounds good. Well, terrific introduction. Thanks, Trudy.
Very, very welcome. And you're both looking very fabulous tonight.
Seems appropriate.
It does, doesn't it? We've got to be glittery for Glitterati. Right, so format of the evening, I'll do a very wee spiel about Glitterati. Then Ollie, are you ready to do a reading?
I can, yeah.
Perfect. And then I'll start asking some questions. Lovely. So, Glitterati, where to even begin with this? I adored this book, like so much. I've been screaming to everyone about how good it is. I honestly haven't read a book this fun in ages. I put aside a Terry Pratchett to read Glitterati, and then I didn't pick up the Terry Pratchett again. And as Ollie knows, I'm a huge Pratchett fan. And so Glitterati is delightfully cruel. It's a searing satire of the mega rich, fashionistas and influencer culture. While also being like really beautiful and queer and firmly rooted in drag culture and aesthetics and looks, as Ollie is showing tonight. So it follows the story of Simone, who's a member of the Glitterati. The Glitterati is this world of elites who have to keep up with fashion. They have to be immaculate all times, otherwise cancel culture will ruin them. And so Simone's life is basically keeping up with this constant world of changing fashion reading all the magazines, finding what's in, what's out, buying new clothes, working on his looks, what to wear. Creating his look takes a good portion of his day, let's say.
Most of the book, to be honest.
Always focusing on it. And it was just fascinating to like read that narrative where look is the most important thing. And while he's like between his fake job, his parties, his posing, and like most importantly, being seen in these gorgeous looks. But he inadvertently becomes rivals with one of the other glitterati, and then his worldview, it's fair to say, it starts to crumble. His worldview starts to crumble, let's say. And that's your wee plot summary. Right, Holly, do you wanna take away a reading? What you gonna read for us tonight?
Sure thing. I'm going to read a very relevant excerpt from Glitterati for the look today, because it is Tuesday, and in the world of the Glitterati, on Tuesdays we wear black and white. Only it's not Tuesday, and Simone has worn the wrong colour to work. But luckily, he's been his look, accidental, mistaken look, is taken to be a fashion innovation, and he and his glorious wife have been invited to a party, and that's where we'll start, with the party. I'm glad I get to read off a monitor, because it means I get to use my hands. Okay. This was the most fabulous party Simone had ever been invited to. The mirrored entrance hall hosted 1,000 Simones and 1,000 Georgies, moving in perfect synchronicity, making their advance a dance, all of their mirrored selves dancing along with them. Through an open door was the cloakroom, and Simone slipped his jacket from his shoulders, attempting to find a vacant hanger along the racks. Everywhere he tried, a magnificent coat was already hanging. There were so many extraordinary designs crammed together that by the time he found a place, he was feeling giddy. Triumphant, Simone turned to see Georgie, who was weeping. Georgie was stood beneath one of the overhead lights so that the brightness of it splashed over her, making the parts of her capable of glinting glint. From her clutch, she had taken a tiny bottle of tears, sourced, no doubt, from only the cleanest unfashionables, and had dripped several drops into her eyes to make them fill and glisten. Currently, there was a single droplet running down her face, rolling from the precise center of her left eye. Get the right eye. Georgie was a well-practiced weeper, and Simone felt another rush of pride. Nobody else wept quite as beautifully as Georgie. "The furs!" she cried. Simone turned and took stock of the racks hosting the furs, and they were so outrageously thick that they bulged outwards as if they were competing with each other for the spotlight. There were a great many creatures he recognized: pink zebras and purple cheetahs and scarlet mink, each bred using the finest of fashion technology to bear the most luxurious coats imaginable. But there were some he did not. One particular specimen caught his eye, and he approached it warily, running his fingers down the pink-tinged fur. "The hide of a polar bear," Georgie whispered, as if she was afraid of disturbing the fur by speaking too noisily in its presence. Simone was aghast. "This looks new. I thought they were extinct." "Very nearly, darling." Simone brushed the soft fur against his face. "I've never seen it in pink before." "I read about it in Fur and Fury. The bear is very carefully exsanguinated over a period of weeks so that its own blood gently dyes its coat. Such suffering! Isn't it just exquisite?" It was indeed exquisite. In fact, there were so many exquisite coats on the racks that Simone once again found himself feeling a wobble of nervousness. "Georgie, darling?" "Yes, dearest?" "Do you have any more of your electric powder?" "A touch." She presented the remains of the tin to him, and he rubbed his fingers around the rim, massaging every last particle into his gums. The powder gave him a little buzz and made him feel as if someone had switched on a spotlight in his brain, and he spent a moment inhaling and exhaling deeply, feeling his nervous wobble subside. "Are you ready, dear heart?" inquired Georgie, her eyes sparkling with the remainder of her tears. There was still a trail of moisture down her cheek from the tear that fell, and she had placed a purple rhinestone at its point of termination beside her lip. "I am, Georgie. Will you hold my hand?" Always. Hand in hand, they entered the party. The runway was a rich purple carpet so brightly lit that it felt as if several suns shone upon it. At the head of the runway, Simone struck his finest pose, splaying his fingers at his neck and turning his chin up and slightly to the right to cast a complex series of shadows across himself with his fingers. A spotlight burned into his retinas, but he ignored the pain and continued glaring up at it, assured that the brightness was doing some rather marvelous things to bring out the whites of his eyeballs. Simone felt the catwalk music tremble up through the base of his feet and into his veins, arteries, and heart. This month, it was fashionable to play catwalk music at precisely 120 beats per minute, which suited Simone very well because he was comfortable synchronizing his heart to it. There had been a fashion a few months ago for music played at 180 beats per minute, which had always left him breathless at parties. In fact, a great many of his friends had suffered heart attacks that month, which was very unfashionable indeed. Focusing on the burning's white spotlight, Simone felt a small thrill as his heart synchronized with the beat. He was ready to make his entrance. Justine had been kind enough to arrange for Simone to arrive last of all. It was an honored position, especially at such a fabulous gathering as this. So Simone delivered his very best poses as he sashayed down the runway to the beat, all those special stances he had been saving up for an event as esteemed as this. Behind him, Georgie synchronized her movements to his, so that both of them moved in a gorgeous flowing dance of beauty, their heartbeats matching the beat and each other. Together, they moved from spotlight to spotlight, caught up in the splendid rhythm of the catwalk. The applause was almost loud enough to be heard over the music. Simone, temporarily blinded, could not see beyond the drop at the edge of the runway, but no doubt beyond stood all manner of remarkable fashionistas, rapt at the display. This was his moment, he knew, and he felt electric in his radical white attire, as if he was brighter than any of the spotlights gushing over him. Why, were he to simply keel over and die at the end of the runway, Simone would consider his life a success, having culminated in such a moment as this. Then there was the end of the catwalk and the steps leading down to the party. The music continued unabated, so loud that nobody could hear anybody else, but that didn't matter. Simone moved among the Glitterati and understood them better by their outfits, gestures, and the particularities of their poses than any words might ever be able to convey. And right now, they were telling him he was fabulous. It was in the way they arched their brows and angled their heads to look at him. It was in the way they tugged their cufflinks in his direction and held their hands over their hearts and regarded him through the lengths of their eyelashes. It was in the way they had accessorized, choosing small pale touches for their outfits, perhaps a ring with a pink stone or a small pink flower looped into a lapel to honor his choice of white for the day. The ballroom was mirrored, making the party appear endless. There were chandeliers above, composed of twists of crystal that cast complementary light over the entire room, making it so that anyone might strike a pose anywhere without worry of their immediate environment clashing with their outfits. Small tables stood everywhere, upon which pyramids of fizzing champagne glasses gleamed, untouched by all, and at the feet of those delicate pyramids were silver trays laden with piles of white powder heaped so lavishly that a little haze rose above each powder mountain. Every now and then a fashionista would delicately huff up a considerable amount, and yet there was so much of it that it seemed as if none of the mountains would ever be reduced to hills. Taking his straw and carefully rolling it up one nostril, Simone leaned over and took in a steady stream of powder himself. The spotlight still burned in his eyes, so he snorted more than he was usually comfortable with, until every part of him tingled and the spotlights began to fade. Thus electrified, he spent a few moments admiring Georgie as she, in turn, inhaled a sizable quantity of powder, turning her eyes slightly upwards so that she would appear in a state of elegant rapture while imbibing her fill. When she was sated, Simone took her by the hand again, and the two of them sauntered through the party, exchanging pleasantries with all they passed by offering appreciative glances and eyebrow raises. There were a few photographers present, fashionable in their own peculiar ways. Simone always liked to see them, the way they crowded their heads with lenses that gleamed so wonderfully no matter the lightning. But he was always a little afraid of them as well. There were some magazines that took delight in ridiculing the unfashionables, and from time to time, one of Simone's friends would be implicated in a dreadful scandal by one of them, exposed wearing the wrong kind of cravat, or captured standing in an ill-lit corridor, or, worst of all, caught wearing something out of season. Flash, flash, flash went their cameras, immortalizing the illustrious Glitterati, and Simone did his best to look as if he were paying them no attention at all. Through the party, Simone strutted, searching for its host. After a while, wandering the tables and enjoying copious amounts of white powder, it became apparent to Simone that Justine was not present. This was most peculiar, and it was reflected across the poses of the party. People tilted their heads and held themselves at angles that denoted curiosity and anticipation, and Simone felt himself falling into the same arrangement, keeping his chin close to his shoulder, as if glancing over it in case she might somehow appear behind him, and walking in slow loops around tables, as if she always might be hiding somewhere along its far edge. Perhaps, Simone thought, she had left already. It was plausible that someone as fabulous as Justine might have left her own party early in order to attend an even more exclusive event elsewhere. Suddenly the music stopped and the room was plunged into darkness. There were ripples of little gasps and the gentle tinkle of crystals. A single spotlight snapped on, highlighting the far end of the room with dazzling white light, where a tall white staircase met a mirrored wall. New music began, but this was not the precise 120 beats per minute that Simone had synchronized his heart to. No, this music was orchestral and flowed from the staircase, as if making an announcement. Without the rhythm of the beat, Simone felt his heart jostle in his chest, leaping about inside him with all manner of nervousness. It was most unbecoming. At the head of the staircase, the mirrored wall slid open, and Justine emerged. She looked like a perfect corpse. Justine was wearing a white cotton dress designed with a mastery that utterly defined its unadorned simplicity. Though the dress was undecorated and made of an apparently inferior material, it drew the eye across its subject in a way that lent it a poetic rhythm, flattering her wonderfully. So too was her face decorated, intricately designed to make it look as if she wore no powders or creams or liners or lipsticks at all. This, combined with the way she had rendered the pallor of her skin a ghastly ivory, had the effect of making her look dead. Why, the shadows under her eyes. She might have passed away mere moments ago. The response from the party was ecstatic. The applause was loud enough to drown out the orchestral music, which Simone only now realized was a dirge. Hundreds of exquisitely manicured hands met, serenading her descent to the party below, the spotlight following each step. And she wasn't even wearing any shoes. She padded down on bare feet, her manicured toenails exposed for all the world to see, and her audience began to cheer, convinced, just as Simone was, that she might have just stood up from a mortuary slab. Cameras flashed everywhere. Simone realized his fists were clenched at his sides and was hasty to correct his mistake. Were he to not applaud Justine, he would be seen to be ungrateful for the honoured arrival time she had given him. So, unclenching his teeth together, he began to clap, trying to slow his heart, which was beating furiously against his ribcage. Sensing Simone's discomfort, Georgie took him by the arm and whispered in his ear, "Simply marvellous, isn't she?" Retaining his composure, Simone hissed back through his teeth. She upstaged me. Yes, darling, but this is her party. She upstaged me by using my look and doing it better than me. With Justine's descent complete, the lights came back on and the thumping 120 beats per minute music resumed. Georgie gently towed Simone to one of the quieter corners of the room, where there was a long bar at which all manner of fabulous people were mixing rainbow cocktails. Simone usually enjoyed cocktails. He liked the way the colours of them ran together, no doubt rendering his interior just as fabulous as his exterior when he drank them, staining his stomach with all their vividness. But he was finding it difficult to concentrate on anything. Nobody was paying him any attention, he noticed. All eyes were instead turned to the party's host. Simone had been forgotten. Taking a cocktail in each hand, after making certain their colours complemented his and Georgie's attire, Simone strolled out beyond the doors at the end of the bar and onto the veranda. The veranda was open to the sky and constructed with the same panelling as the rest of the house, making it look as if the swimming pool was floating in midair. So too did it seem as if Simone strolled, godlike, high above the city. The hideous masses crawled in the dirt below, while the glorious Glitterati walked on air. At the edge of the veranda, Simone sipped at his cocktails and felt his heart flutter. Above, the stars glittered, and below, the city glittered. There was a full moon tonight, and while it was fashionable to admire the moon, Simone secretly hated it because of the way it was pockmarked and asymmetrical, resembling the faces of the dreadful uglies who never bothered to correct any of their natural deformities. Instead, the veranda was lit by a selection of superior pale globes suspended above the swimming pool, and they had no such scars and craters inflicted upon them. Simone glared up at the moon, draining his cocktails and imagining in delicious detail throwing Justine off the edge of her own veranda. Georgie emerged from the shadows with a silver tray, heaped so high with white powder that a little drifted from the edges. Here, darling, she said gently, a little something to raise your spirits. You were wonderful tonight, I promise. Was I? The applause for your entrance still rings in my ears. Simone placed his empty glasses upon the edge of the tray and retrieved his straw from his inner pocket, using it to inhale powder until it began to sting his throat. Then he continued to inhale, gulping so much powder that the world turned bright and swirled around him. Only when his vision began to wheel did he stop, almost choking when he took a step back. Georgie steadied him with an arm. Darling? Wonderful, said Simone. Simply wonderful. There was something about the way the light of the globe suspended above the pool refracted through the gently rippling water that attracted Simone, and he wandered across, delighted at the glowing patterns. Standing at the very edge so that the tips of his shoes almost, but not quite, touched the water, Simone began to feel better. A drop of something dark fell into the water. The black liquid, whatever it was, began to spread out like ink, and Simone watched it in horror, unable to draw his eyes from the tentacle-like extremities of it, spreading like an infection. There was a small splash as a second droplet fell, and then a third, mingling and intertwining with and staining the pool with darkness. Watching these dreadful droplets dissipate, Simone began to feel dizzy, as if he might topple over and into the pool himself, dissolving like one of them. Simone! It was Georgie. She sounded panicked. Dragging his eyes from the horror of the pool, Simone turned to see her aghast, eyes wide, hands raised in horror, as if she might have to hide herself from the sight of him. It was then that Simone felt the wetness on his upper lip. Dabbing a finger experimentally at it, produced the same black liquid that had fallen into the pool. Hardly daring to breathe, Simone glanced down at his suit and saw there were droplets of it everywhere, smearing it with darkness. Georgie? Simone was suddenly terribly afraid. Your nose! Her voice trembled. It's bleeding! Being foolish enough to wear something unfashionable could result in the subject being ostracized and mocked almost indefinitely. Accidentally wearing a past season wardrobe was enough to warrant exile from polite society, but having an actual bodily fluid drip out of your nose and stain your suit, why, it was worse than unheard of. It was mortifying. Simone knew he would never be able to show his face again. He glanced about, splattering his shoulders with more of his own blood. Luckily, it didn't look as if there was anybody else out on the veranda. Only he and Georgie were visible. Georgie herself was breathing heavily, doing everything in her power to avoid looking at him, turning her eyes to the moon, the stars, the pool, the city. Georgie, said Simone, we must leave quickly before I am noticed. Yes, yes. She raised one trembling figure to the darkest corner of the veranda. There is a back gate. Perhaps we might be able to reach the limousine unseen. Quickly, they hastened across. Clear glass steps descended to the dark driveway ahead, where all the cars idled. More droplets of blood oozed down Simone's suit, and he paused momentarily, trying to stop the flow from his nose by pressing his fingers to it. The gesture only served to increase the blood pouring from him, so he removed his hand and flicked his fingers, spraying droplets over the edge of the cliff. There was a sudden bright flash, and the whir of a camera from somewhere across the veranda. Someone had taken a picture. Georgie hurtled down the staircase, almost tripping with every step, and Simone followed, trying desperately to maintain his balance through his panic. Then they were back in the car park and hastening between all the exquisite vehicles. No doubt the ugly drivers at the wheel of each had witnessed Simone's undignified escape, but it didn't matter if they saw. If they tried to tell anyone about it, they would be summarily dismissed due to their ugliness. At last, there was the limousine, glowing pearlescent white and pink in the dark, and there was Georgie swinging the rear door open. Simone dived into the safety of its interior. There was a stack of serviettes on the drinks cabinet, and even though they were only meant for aesthetic purposes, Simone grabbed all of them and used them to wad his nose. Still too delirious to think properly, Simone laid back against the cool leather of the limousine and let his vision whirl. Home, he whispered beneath the tissues. Take us home.
So when can I start a Kickstarter for you to do the entirety of the book? I want to read all of it. That was great.
Only with the full hand gestures.
Yes.
Very important.
Theatrical performance. We need to get this on.
So good.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much. And that was such a good passage to choose as well. I loved just the insight into the party culture, the socialite culture, and some amazing looks in that scene as well. Like
the corpse.
Yeah. So I thought maybe we could talk about some of those looks. Fashion plays such a big part in Glitterati, of course, but also in Cassandra's and yours books as well. Like there's a lot about aesthetics. So where do you two get your inspiration for the looks? Where do these ideas come from? There's some gorgeous, gorgeous looks in there.
I don't know where to start.
I don't know where to say exactly. I give a lot of credit for Glitterati and the looks in it to two sources. The first is obviously Drag Race, which is just the most. It's if you're looking for fashion innovation anywhere on the planet, that's the place to look. That's when Paris is stealing all of its designs from, is Drag Race and these incredible drag queens coming up with incredible custom outfits. Secondly, also an old friend of mine, Ross Verick, who did my makeup for years and years when we were touring as a band, and just came up with fabulous look after fabulous look, and kind of inspired this book. How about you, Cassandra?
I was trying frantically to think while you were giving your answer. I think I know of two sources. One of it is kink culture, the letter and the latex and the chokers and all that. There are big influence on my life and a big influence on aesthetics that I enjoy. I like the idea of normalizing, seeing more of it out. I am overjoyed by the amount of harnesses they're featuring these days in fashion. And the other is a weird source. So my day job is in video games, and I profit a lot from the fact that I've always worked with amazing art departments, and every now and then the look just flickers past it. I'm like, oh, I'm going to save that in my Pinterest. Like, this is staying. I know you're not using concept art for the actual game, but this is going into my wardrobe. Thank you so much.
Oh, that's fantastic.
I was going to ask you about one particular character of yours, actually, from your new book. Let's advertise that. The All-Consuming World. It's so good. It's so good. You have they have two names, Verdigris and Ian. What was the inspiration for that character? Because they are a fabulous pop star with incredible like surgical enhancements that make and body modifications that are extraordinary post-human. I feel like you do what I do with Glitterati and take it a step further there.
Cronenberg, honestly, I love so much of his aesthetics. I know he leans so much into the grotesque, but at the same time, there's like this certain sensuality up to it. And it just kind of makes sense to push it a little bit further. Like, why won't you have glowing hair and jellyfish tentacles for like the strands? Like, it makes sense to me. Also, Drag Race. Drag Race is a huge influence. Dear God, Drag Races look amazing.
Perfect. So let's talk about Verdigris a little bit, because I think that fits so well into that party scene and Justine turning up on Spotlight and Verdigris turning up on stage with the luciferin glands. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what that is and what kind of fashion technology you are innovating with it?
Basically, it's the thing that allows certain animals to kind of light up in the dark. And I kind of, with Verdigris, I wanted to investigate the idea of what happens after trauma. The whole book is a lot about it. So some people, they get stuck in a cycle of it. Maya is trapped in that cycle of violence forever. Others just completely go left field, go into a little planet somewhere, enjoy being like a farmer, just have a quiet, peaceful life. Constance leaps into the arms of law enforcement because it represents the polar opposite of what they had to deal with. But with Verdigris, I wanted him to have joy. I wanted her to look onto all this technology and go, you know what, fuck it, I am going to make myself into the brightest possible light I can. And part of it for him and in my creation of him is she kind of hopes that it will burn away all the darkness in that past if he lights his life, his current life up as much as possible. Of course, other problems present itself. But yeah, kind of like that. Just try and blind the darkness.
Like, that's a good way of dealing with trauma, I think. Just shine brighter, which is kind of what Simone is trying to do in competition with Justine, like throughout the book, just shine as brilliantly as possible.
Kind of. I think, you know, Glitterati is weirdly about trauma in a way as well. It in that the Glitterati regularly have traumatic memories removed. But it's taken, again, to an extreme where everything that remotely might be considered traumatic by this haughty, ultra wealthy class of people is removed to the point where it almost makes them into these buffoonish, fashion obsessed. It's the reason why they are this way. They have their entire childhoods removed in case it might be considered remotely embarrassing. It's a completely different sort of response.
Whole like world building point feels like a send up of like social media culture, especially Instagram. The more visual media is how much we push to like remove even a single wrinkle, a single unflattering fall of the light. I think I love Glitterati the moment I realized that there were parallels there and what it really does mean for the rest of us, like how we just hide our traumas behind the pretty pictures we put online.
Yeah, it's where what happens when you become all surface. Mm.
Yes. I don't get Doctorate.
Well, let's tighten that up then. The superficiality, let's say, So we've got the looks, but we also have like a real superficiality in the relationships. Every bit of dialogue, like Simone's never saying what's on his mind, even with his wife, who he loves to pieces. But like their whole relationship is really interesting because of that superficiality and the fact they've forgotten huge chunks of their lives, and yet they know they're married. They know they love each other. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. It's weird, honestly, how much Simone and Georgie genuinely love each other. Because when I and this I'm sure is something you can speak to, Cassandra, when you set out to write a book, you have ideas of what relationships will be, but it comes down to how it comes out on the page when you're writing. And I had the idea that, yes, of course, Simone would be in a marriage with Georgie. And then as I was writing, I realized as I was writing them that they genuinely do love each other. And it turns out to be this, because most of the characters in Glitterati are very, very unlikable. It's nice to have had that sort of heart in there, that they're almost still human after all. But no, it took me by surprise how much Simone and Georgie love each other. And by the end, it was like, just like, I can't do anything to disturb this. I can't break up.
Worried. I was so worried by the end. I was like, no, do not. They must be together.
Those last few pages, I was just like, oh God, are we going to get destroyed? I won't give spoilers, but I was happy.
But one of the things that I really loved about them is, even though they are so superficial and so stuck in their society, they did build a vocabulary of love despite all of it. Like, it's true that Simone just kind of runs around going, oh, how pretty Georgie is, look at this and that. But the level of detail that goes into his observations, the small little things that she does that he appreciates, you see that love shining through there. And then there's this like other part of him that just wants to kind of smack him and say, like, learn better love languages.
Yeah,
such a wonderful idiot.
He is an absolute, yeah, he's a buffoon. I love, yeah, my publicist for this book says it's one of the stupidest books she's ever read, and she meant that as a compliment, because it is jam-packed full of stupid people doing stupid things, but there is a certain core to them. They are still human. Yeah.
How did you find like writing from the perspective of a character who, yeah, looks all through at the world through the aesthetic, and also just doesn't know like loads of stuff and has the memory loss, and the way that, yeah, every one of Simone's interactions makes perfect sense for who Simone is and where he comes from, but like that's so different from us self-reflecting and not, you know.
That's the trick, is finding a character's voice and point of view. I struggle with it a lot, actually. It's one of the toughest things to do, is find a consistent a character point of view that will live on in your head and feel consistent on the page. And Simone is one of the rare exceptions where he just leapt off the page straight away. Was it the same for you with? I think Maya is the biggest point of view character in here.
She was, in a weird way, both one of the most difficult characters I ever wrote and one of the easiest ones, because at the core, she is somebody who has just submitted to that rage I think we all feel at some point in our lives, when we just kind of want to burn everything down.
Yeah.
And Maya never figured out how to crawl out of it. And you can tell it's because Rita keeps her there, because like by the end of the book she saw surfaces. But yeah, it's really interesting, because you in the all-consuming world, it's about a group called the Dirty Dozen, or they have multiple names, but that's the one you stick with, and they're all different. It's almost like a heist gang in a way. They've all got specialities. And you chose the point of view of the gun,
A brawler, I suppose. There is a different character who could more accurately be called the gun. But the muscle, there we go, that's the word I was looking for, the muscle. Well, that was such an interesting choice of all the point of views you could have had. What made you go for that?
I thought we were interviewing you. Hey.
Sorry, I enjoyed this book.
Weirdly enough, it probably comes from my own martial arts training. I did competitive Muay, and before that, my dad, who was a very interesting fellow, was very keen to give me fight training. And what I discovered is I tend to take a lot of hits and kind of run people into the corner and start bopping them. I am not the one who dodges and do not do fancy flips. I will just chase you in the corner and beat you down. And so in a way, it just felt very natural to get the dumb break of the muscle in.
Amazing choice. Amazing choice.
Writing that much anger, that much swearing onto a page. Do you think that helped with the anger at all? With just because both of your books are so angry at society, right? That's what I'm getting at. How did you both find getting that kind of satire and that anger out, and the big themes that you deal with, the billionaires, the people trying to destroy planets, or the not people, the AIs trying to destroy planets?
I think it comes from a place of helplessness, which is an odd way of saying it, but we are kind of helplessly caught up in capitalism. It's inescapable. It's part of our lives. The most we can do is sort of swim through it and do our best within a system that is clearly broken and not working. And we can see the symptoms of capitalism not working. They're very clear. We have, billionaires buying their way into offices they're not suited for. We've got billionaires launching themselves in rockets shaped like penises into space. We've got billionaires buying up social media companies because they don't like being censored. And it's almost so far beyond satire that it's difficult to to make fun of in an effective way, which is why science fiction is such a good vehicle for doing that, because we can take those themes, those the symptom of inequality so gross that it produces people who are barely people anymore. They are these grotesque sort of inhuman godlike figures that we are inescapable in our lives because they dominate the news cycle, and give them that science fiction twist and really ramp up. Well, that's what I did for Glitterati, was take all of those ugly sort of the arrogance, the buffoonery, the glamour, the absolute self-belief and righteousness, and amp it up to an extreme level to make this sort of relentlessly beautiful but horrible parody of what we're living through as a way of laughing at it. That's all we can do.
I will unfortunately say that Glitterati feels like a better dystopia than the one we're living in. You're kind of functional. There is a society. There are people, making things work. It's not great. But I think you're in a better place than we are.
At least the corruption's obvious, right?
Yes, you're very obvious about it. You're very upfront. No one lies about it.
It's just the way it is. Yeah, I mean, maybe, there's an honesty and a helplessness, and there's things in Glitterati specifically that I think are weirdly nice. There's just an absolute acceptance of everyone's everyone's gender, everyone's preferences, and there's no qualms about any of that. Anyone can wear anything. Clothes aren't gendered. That was really lovely to write. There's an openness to sexuality that's nice as well. I mean, obviously, all of these people are horrible, but they're a weird. It's a weird sort of dystopian utopia kind of thing happening there.
The casual pansexuality was just lovely. Just the offhand mentions of like random orgies for no reason whatsoever. I took so much delight in that.
And how Simone sees Darlington, and just that was very fun to read.
Yeah, the night of aesthetic sexual times with his wife, followed by a morning at the gym observing his very attractive muscular friend pumping the irons. I think it's Simone's clearly having a very, very good day that day.
I don't think anyone ever has a good day in the all-consuming world now. Everyone has a miserable day, full stop.
It's true. I'm trying to think.
But I think with the book, it was less about getting anger out as much as it was exploring trauma. I feel like for a lot of people, especially people who do not believe in therapy, who I was once one of, there's this kind of weird belief that if you just keep it bottled up long enough, it'll be fine, because at some point you'll die and you don't have to deal with it. And the all-consuming world kind of removes that you are trapped forever with your traumas and your ghosts and your rage. And in that immortality, you need to figure out a way to get through things. And so much of the book was just me trying to understand, in a where I guess it was a character study, how different people interpret trauma and where it goes and where it can go.
Yeah, the way that without people being able to die or coming back again and again. So we should say for the audience that in the all-consuming world, like Maya, the main character, kills herself again and again, but she's part clone, part cyborg, and correct me if I'm wrong, and so she can come back. Each time she kills herself, she comes back. And so there's definitely something in that where life becomes less meaningful and her choices kind of change. And that I felt that worked really well with like the fashion for deadly clothes in Glitterati as well. And the fact that they removed the trauma from people who have survived these fashion trends and their friends have died. And there was the fashion for heart attacks in the segment you read, Ollie. And well, not fashion for heart attacks. People died from heart attacks because of the fashion. But yeah, the way that kind of life and death loses its meaning was so interesting in both of your works.
There's an interesting contrast, I think, where Glitterati is very, very embodied. It's all about the body. It's all about how you look. It's always lingering on aesthetics and how people feel about themselves as bodies. Whereas the all-consuming world, by contrast, is very disembodied. There's almost a disconnection there, and in deliberate, is in the way that Maya switches off her pain centers. It's in the way that bodies are taken over. It's in the way that the minds have multiple bodies and multiple selves. They multiply themselves. So I thought that was a really cool contrast and very different explorations of themes of embodiment and disembodiment.
I never thought of it like that, but you are 100% right on it.
Yeah, but both of you really do deal with the grotesque and have like really visceral explorations of that, like the surgeries in both books. They're just, yeah, they really, at one point I had to kind of like put the book down and be like, oh, that was actually a lot. And I'm thinking of like Simone's hand, when he cuts it on a bit of glass, and then the reconstruction, and then Maya with when Rita's the eye gouging scene, it was really like
I was just going to say that the surgery scene in Glitterati caught me off guard in the best way, and I remember the sitting the whole time. And it takes a lot for me to do that.
It ended up being extremely visceral. in a really interesting way. I think it's what it needed to be there. And yeah, it's the same. Again, this is something I picked up from the all-consuming world. We both have mechanical spider things that come down from the ceiling to do it. If you've seen the trailer for Crimes of the Future, which that kind of reminded me of that as well. Which, yeah, looking forward to that. Yeah, there's something to be said for using the visceral well, which is a difficult thing to do. It is, I'm sure, as you can, like Cassandra is a master of it. It's something that really comes out in your books, is how you use the visceral, and it's this embodiment, disembodiment. There's a horror to it in some of your other works, and it's in language choice, it's in care, it's in making it not just shocking, but purposefully shocking. It's always there doing something. And for Glitterati, yeah, the surgery scene is a moment of absolute horror that acts as a peek behind the curtain of what it actually takes to maintain the lives of the Glitterati, which doesn't happen often in the book, actually. For a book that's ostensibly not actually about the Glitterati, it's about everything else. You don't get to see much of the behind the scenes, and that's one of the earlier moments.
But you do such a great job in implying the bigger world and all of those little details, those big shocking moments. My brain just kind of was churning by the end of it, especially when the certain lawyers showed. I was like, oh shit. And it's just wonderful. You have such a gift world building in minimal space, like just in a throwaway sentence, in the framing of something. And I'm just sitting there, oh my God. It's just this entire universe unfolds. Like, your gift for imagery is just amazing.
Thank you. I think, yeah, if there's anything I like doing well, it's making something beautiful, and even beautiful horror. Which is worth doing, I think. We get a lot of beauty, and I have Cassandra's other latest book here.
That's how we respond to compliments.
Yeah, I'm going to compliment you back twice as much. Which is, again, beautiful horror. There's something about the Blackened Teeth. Yeah, not that I want to spoil that one. But beauty and horror, I think, are a lot closer united than most people probably suspect.
I think it's partially tied to the reason why we're so afraid of body horror. At the end of the day, most of us, we kind of run around going, this thing that we are, the skin and the clothes and everything else, that is us. That is the entirety of us. As far as I know, most people spend a lot of time trying to avoid paying attention to the fact we're actually a bit of like fatty tissue locked up inside bone, and at any moment there's something festering under the surface. There is a tumor growing, there is a heart developing plaque, there is, I don't know, tapeworms in the stomach. You never know, and we live so much of our life blissfully away from it. And so when beauty and horror kind of interconnects, I think it sort of prods at the subconscious, going like, there is not much difference. That pretty person that you see, that a jaw-dropping model underneath that is 20 meters of like gross, greasy intestine, same as everyone else. I spent a lot of time thinking about this girl. I don't know, that's obvious.
It definitely is a nothing but blackened teeth. Like, the way the house is built on the bones of people, it's just, yeah. Exactly what you're talking about, that however beautiful these brides are, they all turn into the foundations of the house, the walls of the house. I think
that knowledge just kind of frightens everyone completely. Yeah. Like, all beauty dies eventually.
Yeah,
I don't think the Glitterati like that. How do they deal with death? Now I'm curious. I don't think I really.
I mean, it's not actually. This is one of the things that didn't make it into the book. There is a lot that doesn't make it into the book. Like, for death is an interesting one. Food is more interesting, I think, in that, because clearly throughout the book, Simone has an awful relationship with food. He's always, it's purely aesthetic, and he never eats enough. So there was an earlier draft where it was revealed that his staff were feeding him at night while he was asleep, using nutritious vapors, making him inhale his food. Death is a very tough one in Glitterati. There's it is brought up slightly at the edges, in that beautiful deaths are coveted. Maybe I can find you the moment, gorgeous way to go. I can remember the exact phrase. Let me find it and I'll read you.
Please do.
And there was that scene of the ice pick and everyone running around.
So this is Simone and Darlington having a discussion at the gym. "Good morning, Darlington," said Simone. "Your hair is wonderful today." Simone had a sunshine yellow water bottle, and he sipped from it to give his aesthetic an athletic kinetic element. "Thank you, Simone," said Darlington. "Your shoes are delicious." The two men spent a while admiring each other. "Did you hear about Cynthia?" asked Darlington. "She perished yesterday." "Oh, how dreadful. She was quite beautiful. Do you know how it happened?" There is, at this point in the book, a fashion for nosebleeds, I should say. "From what I hear, she tried to use a 6-inch stiletto to give herself a nosebleed and accidentally lobotomized herself." Darlington's expression was wistful. "Apparently, it was quite the sight to behold. She was drenched in blood down to her toes, and a stiletto was embedded so deeply up her nostril that nobody could get it out, all the way to the hilt. Gorgeous way to go." And that's it. That's the deepest exploration of death in the book, I think.
I can't imagine they have funerals, at least not open caskets.
No.
Or could they?
Frozen, perhaps. I don't know. I was struggling with this genuinely, and it's not something that made it into the book. I do have plans to write not a sequel, but a sort of in the universe sidequel. I don't know what you call them. And that one would definitely have to explore it.
I'm excited. I love this book so much.
Yeah, me too. And the whole world of Glitterati. Like, I was listening to a banging playlist and like strutting around Edinburgh, channeling Simone. So I need more of this because it was really helping my self-esteem. Right, so before we go on to audience questions, we've spoken quite a bit about the beauty and the grotesque, and like one of the most beautiful things that's very sci-fi is Carper Fisher's house. So can we talk a little bit about Carper Fisher's house, and then I'll ask some audience questions.
The House of All Seasons. Yeah. So in the world of Glitterati, there are not just the Glitterati, there is a level above them. The lauded designers, the saints of fashion. And Simone, during his journey, becomes acquaintances with one of them, a designer by the name of Carper Fish, which I just love that name even to this day. And he lives in a house, a legendary house called the House of All Seasons, which actually began, the idea behind the House of All Seasons is that clearly a designer needs to be looking ahead at the fashionable seasons to come, to be able to work out what's going to be the next big thing. So I kind of took that literally and then gave him a house, which it is a fun one to discover in the book, I think, that is quite literally seasons ahead. It's every single room is modular and able to be changed for its current season of the year, making for a house where one room is in autumn, the conservatory is in winter, the observatory is in autumn, the piano room is in summer, and the garden is in spring, and endless little rooms like that. And it was such a gorgeous idea that I've sort of run away with it, and I'm doing a collaborative project with another author on a book called City of All Seasons, which I don't know if she's watching tonight. It's really coming along in a really interesting way. We're doing some really interesting things with it. Very different from Glitterati, but yeah, the House of All Seasons is definitely a highlight of Glitterati, just for how interesting it was to write and I think read. It's interesting because going through Glitterati, you probably have the reaction, how on earth do you get more opulent than this? Because it's all opulence all the way through. It's relentless. And then somehow the House of All Seasons manages to do that. And honestly, it's not a trick I intended. It just sort of happened.
You can tell you're just having so much fun describing it and creating it and just letting your imagination run riot. Yeah.
I feel like the whole book has that too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like that book is a joy. Was it a joy to write? Were there any parts where you're like, ugh?
I mean, there always are, aren't there? I'd say all the, well, I tend to be the writer who any bits I don't like, I get rid of. So yeah, they happened quite a lot, but especially near the end, which was a tricky one to sort of work out. But all the bits that are in there, it's clear I'm, you know, having fun with it, which I think is something I do at a scene level. I feel like, Sandra, you're always having fun with your writing. That's what I get when I'm reading it. But on like the sentence level, in the language, in the way that you construct your sentences, the joy in the language there.
Thank you. I think it's because English wasn't like my first language. It is my third language, and it's just something I picked up almost as a novelty and a curiosity. And being able to look at a language and start breaking it, start fracturing it, removing parts and finding more jewel bits on the inside, it just makes me so happy. I think it's one of the reasons why I just fell head over heels with Glitterati as well. Like, there is a joy in language. There is a focus on light that I don't see enough in books, and how light works to change aesthetics and appearances. And like, there's so many books that do wonderful things, and I don't know why anyone writes lean literature, I'll be honest. I mean, I understand there is a reason for it and a market for it. I respect everyone's choices, but like when you have so much you can do with language, it just blows my mind. Complete sidebar. One of my favorite writers is Frances Harding. And I picked up one of her books ages ago, A Face Like Glass. Torture, I think it was like 700 pages, just devoured it, utterly in love with the descriptions, the sentences, the work she did with the prose. Completed the book, looked at her backlist. I think I bought everything else immediately and finished all of it in this fever dream of a week. And when I was done and really started for more, it was only then that I realized that every single one of those books were middle grade books. And it just struck me, like the artistry and the flexibility of the language, how you can make something so poetic and so beautiful. But yes, like in hindsight, we also completely accessible to the middle grade audience. Like, language is so neat. And it's hard not to be happy when I'm working with it.
That's lovely. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, because both of you, when you're using language, it comes across how much you love it, and then to read some of those sentences and just be like, oh, that is a really good sentence. And I work as a proofreader and editor, like it's really nice to get a really good, well-constructed sentence, and you're like, I understand what each word is doing here, but it's also poetic. Right, I should move us along to some questions from our lovely audience. So we have a question from Jay Shots. What are some elements of your stories that you find yourself including again and again in your work? And I think this is to both of you.
I think if there's any, this is a tough question. What keeps coming up? Is there something that keeps turning up? I like exploring beauty, and making beautiful things is probably the the answer there, whether it be a beautiful scene or a beautiful moment, a beautiful sentence. I think if there is a running theme in all of my work, it is beauty and exploring beauty.
Inversely, mine is gore.
Yeah.
Something I guess latched onto is the idea that a lot of violence that we see in media is deeply sanitized. It's just red blood, no matter where you poke, no matter where you cut, there's only a single beautifully crimson fluid that flows out of people. And I've always wondered if that's the reason we get desensitized to the atrocities that happen if we don't pay enough attention, if we go, oh, okay, that was terrible, and just move on with our lives. Because media has just kind of primed us for believing it's not that bad. A little quick shout and maybe a dramatic monologue, and then it's done, we're done. And with a lot of my books, I kind of wanted to remind people that pain is awful, regardless of who is enduring it. Every injury you could possibly receive is a god-awful thing. And I want when people to read my books, if they see real life examples of it, to just pause, to think harder, to try harder, to not turn away. And that's partially the reason why gore, very, very anatomically correct gore, keeps coming up in my writing. And I think the other part of it, something I realized from a recent interview, is I'm also very much a hypochondriac. My parents were not good people, and they did weird things to engender a fear of my body and a fear of medicine and a fear of medical professionals. And I'm going to leave it at that, including this one time I woke up in the middle of surgery screaming at the top of my lungs, so that didn't help. And writing violence and writing gore is a weird way of just getting used to all of these things as a safe way to explore those really deep primordial fears that my life has embedded in me. So yeah, that's why gore keeps coming up, and gore is definitely the thing that keeps coming up. I have a short story that I wrote for one of Ellen Datlow's anthology where I recall going, I don't know what I'm going to do anymore, so I'm going to chuck a bucket of guts onto this page and I'll figure it out.
It's one way to do it, and that actually ties in really well with a question from George Prue. I loved the first hospital scene in Glitterati, repairing Simone's hands. We touched on this earlier. Do you feel the body horror of the scene served a wider thematic point for the book, or was it more functional to introduce the idea of trauma removal? Or was it, as Cass is just saying, throw gore on this page and see what happens?
So a lot of the time when you're writing a longer piece, you have an idea of where you want to start and where you want to go with it. And a lot of the time it comes out on the page, sort of what comes next comes out on the page. So I had the idea when I was coming to that scene that it would obviously be a surgery scene because Simone needs his hand repaired. I didn't, when I sat down, deliberately sit down with the idea that this is going to be really visceral. That's not what the scene was about. And when I set out to write it, it was a part of memory removal. This is how it's going to work. He's going to have his hand repaired, then he's going to have no memory of it. It being visceral, however, and this is where we're going to read a reception theory, I think has done some interesting things with the themes of it. I think there are things to take away from that, especially things like if you could forget things, what would you forget? Which I think is a very interesting question.
It really is, given like how prevalent repressed memories happen in terms of trauma.
Yeah, I was asked for part of the Instagram tour, I think, for Glitterati, was if you could have one piece of technology from Glitterati out in the real world, what would it be? And there's loads of things in that book that are weird, like the paneling that lets people turn invisible, and fashion advances, incredibly deadly fashions as technology. But I answered that I would actually take the memory erasure technology out of there and introduce it to the real world if I could. It would obviously be hugely controversial, and the ethics of using it would be extremely questionable. But there are some people who have memories that damage them, and you know, it would be nice to be able to offer relief.
I could definitely see that.
Yeah. And at the same time, that the whole idea of the lobotomy is part of the grotesque within Glitterati. And there, especially at that scene, there was part of me being like, no, you can't take your memories away. Why? And then that comes up again a bit later. But yeah, it's just such an interesting concept, to take away those memories, and who are you without your memories? But it could be a relief for certain. It's like, I guess it brings us back into the idea of pain relief.
I also really appreciated like the breadth of memories that need to be taken away. It's not just the exact instant like that. Your book is always so full of like beautiful little details, and it's like, yes, of course you have to take 3 months worth of memories, otherwise all of it's kind of tied together. And I think it ties to what you said about bringing the memory machine into the real world. It would be hugely controversial, because if you're going to remove painful memories, you're probably not going to take like isolated incidents. You're probably going to have to carve like 5-10-year chunks out of people.
Right. And then what does that do to a person?
No.
It is an interesting one. I feel like Glitterati does some interesting things with memory, but I know that there's other books out there that go way steps and steps further into exploring it. I mean, the Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, right? That's what I always cite, is that's the go-to piece of media for thinking about memory removal, just because it does it beautifully. Again, beautiful memory erasure. That's the way. Fun fact though, during the editing process of and I think one of my editors is here today. Hi, Darby, if you're watching. During the editing process, at the end of the surgery scene, when Simone's memory is erased, the scene stops mid-sentence. And at every stage of the editing process, I was asked, "Is this deliberate?" Which is amazing. That was fun.
Well, it works in the final draft, I'll tell you that.
It made it in.
Totally.
We got there.
Okay, so we have a question from Anonymous. How much research did you do on the vocabulary of fashion and design? And did any such research affect the final book?
I mean, watched a lot of Drag Race.
Do you like draw out the outfits as well, or are they all just written into the book?
Everything is written in. Yeah, I don't. I guess I have a very visual sort of mind when I'm writing things. It's looks, but everything was developed from. I didn't actually put in an enormous amount of research. This was just picking things up from various places, I suppose. Accidentally tuning into America's Next Top Model while my sister was watching it and things like that, I suppose. And yeah, copious amounts of Drag Race. And obviously, if you watch Drag Race, there is a lot of construction of clothing in there. And similarly, like all of the makeup in there, which I tried to get as sort of accurate as I could. That comes from, again, Ross Verrick, who spent years of his life painting my face. So I know in intimate detail each stage of the process of getting made up. My partner did this today, which I'm very grateful for. Thank you, Gabe.
So good.
It was extremely. It's actually really lovely having your face made up. It's a nice experience. Gentle brushing her face.
I have a sort of related question. Which season of Drag Race is most influential on the book?
Oh no, you can't ask me that. I wouldn't be able to tell you off the top of my head. I think when I was putting together images for the cover artist to send a sort of palette of things, I can tell you it was the more I want to say out there drag queens that sort of I was sending across, or rather the bolder makeup styles, not out there drag queens. That's maybe not what I mean. So drag queens like Crystal Method comes to mind,
Yes,
and off the top of my head, I'm struggling to name anyone. In fact, if you watch Drag Race, it is a happy coincidence that Simone is named. It has the same name as the winner of was it 13? Season 13 was Simone?
Yeah.
Never watched season 13 yet.
Oh no! I'm so sorry.
Sorry, everyone.
I mean, no, just Simone from one of the seasons of Drag Race. It's nobody in particular. Yeah, happy coincidence.
Well, because when I was reading the book, I messaged just Ollie earlier. I was just like, what's Simone like? Was there a relation to Simone from Drag Race? Because I'm literally, especially with some of the poses, I was imagining drag queen Simone as Simone, the main character.
Simone is fucking fabulous.
Yeah.
But, yeah, no, funnily enough, the name Simone, I mean, Glitterati, the book comes from a short story I wrote in 2016, I want to say. So this was long before Drag Race Simone. So, yeah, happy coincidence.
Yeah. Right, another question from Anne. Does the acceptance of gender and sexual preferences cross class boundaries within the...
Oh, that's an interesting question.
And that's a good question for you, Cass, as well. So the gender and sexual preferences crossing class boundaries, we only see it within the Glitterati, but what's going on in the rest of the world? This
is something I need to explore with the sequel. I'll give you the title of it, because as soon as I tell anyone the title, it's the reason why I have to write it is because the title is too good. I'm going to eventually, I don't know when it'll be, write a book called The Fashion Police, which will be right. It's too good. I can't not write that in the universe of Glitterati, which I pitched to my agent as what is it? Judge Dredd meets Queer Eye, which
I want this so much.
This sounds so fun. So that will be Glitterati is the billionaire class. It's the ultra wealthy class. So I need to scope out and do something. But yeah, I make it queer as heck. Why not? That sounds fun.
Cass, do you want to add anything to making books queer as heck? Because you're very good at that.
I think this was actually a philosophy that I kind of adopted after working with a good friend who runs an indie studio. And they actually have a new game coming out set in the 90s. It is lots of dealing with immigrant families, lots of dealing with intergenerational trauma and how that ties with the idea of being like a second-gen immigrant when your parents are first-gen immigrants. And one of the big things that came up in the early discussions of it, I'm not mentioning it just in case they want to keep this little tidbit for their own news articles. One of the things they came up with is, you're just going to go no to the whole idea of a homophobic society. Everything else is rooted in the real, but if you're creating fiction, you can actually make that choice of saying, absolutely not. No one is going to be queerphobic. Everyone's going to be accepting of like gender and sexuality in this world, full stop, because you're making it. And that just kind of stuck with me and has followed me through every book. I also don't like the idea of just dealing with that. Like, there's enough of it in the real world.
Oh, absolutely.
There are enough monsters in my book. They don't need more.
Yeah, when you were saying earlier about Glitterati feeling like less of a dystopia than this current world, I was just like, yeah, a lot of that is the anyone can wear a dress. Georgie looks great in a pantsuit. Simone's just doing whatever the hell he wants to do. And that kind of freedom, yeah, does give the
right?
Yeah, and I really, really love that. And with one of your characters in the all-consuming world, just suddenly they come out as trans, change their appearance through I'm trying to avoid spoilers here. So yeah, they change their appearance through technology, and it's all just so cool, and it's so anti-transphobic. That was just so refreshing to read in amongst all the gore and violence.
It's a very wholesome book on some level.
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like we need a lot more good trans content to combat some of the nonsense coming out of a bigger name in science fiction fantasy. Like if there's any way that us, much smaller authors can rebel, it's by writing stuff that's, explicitly against that rhetoric.
I want to just slide in here to do a tiny shout out for Manhunt. Gretchen Falco Martin, I have butchered her name, I think. It's her debut novel. It is gorgeous. It is gory. It is very upfront about a lot of the issues we've been discussing, and it is just so gorgeously unapologetically trans. I just love that book so much.
Manhunts.
Yes, it's also absolutely terrifying. It should come with like a book of trigger warnings. I will add that to the front.
Cool. Good to know. That sounds great. Okay, not long left, so a couple more questions. I've got a question from Ruth. When do we get an Ollie and Cass's collaboration on a fashionista post-Cthulhu verse? Is that something you two might want to do?
I don't know if Ollie has time.
What day of the week would tentacles be? Part of the problem is, right, I feel like David Cronenberg's just beating us to it with Crimes of the Future, which is about body modification fashion, right? That's the whole thing.
But it's not quite Lovecraftian.
True.
There's a small window there before he starts the next one.
You can get into, so you better do it quickly before that takes off.
Oh, Crimes of the Future is going to be gorgeous, though. I cannot wait for that. It's so lovely.
The trailer looks amazing. I know I'm going to be like properly vomiting, but it'll be good vomit, happy vomit.
Right.
His work is just so sensual. Crash was a movie that deeply disturbed me, but was also just so luscious for its topic. For those of you who have not watched Crash, it is about a bunch of people who get really turned on by car crashes and being in car crashes, and it really should not work, but it oddly does. It is very unsettling. I'm sorry.
No. Are you going to take that inspiration into any of your work?
I don't deal very much with sex in my work. Weirdly enough, it's mostly the violence, but there's a first never anything.
There is, absolutely. Right, another question from Ruth. This one is for Oliver. Did you take inspiration for Glitterati from Red Dwarfs the Cat for any of the characters? I'm assuming you know, Ruth, that this is...
No, but I love the reference. Yeah, I the cat is an incredible character, and fabulous, far ahead of his time, right? For TV. No, good shout though.
Well, I have an inspiration question. Did you ever read the Lemony Snicket books? Because in the Ersatz elevator, there's this thing where fashion is something is either in or out. And it's literally like you took those few lines and you just exploded it. That wasn't an influence for you either?
Oddly enough, no. but that might have been one of those unintentional. Like I've obviously seen all of this series and the movies, so it might have unintentionally wormed in there, and so maybe unintentionally. No, I think in terms of influences, I mean, we're coming from a place of Zoolander, of even a bit of Bret Easton Ellis, with the very famous, although it's more of the movie thing with the cards being exchanged, and taking that and turning it into an entire book, than Lemony Snicket specifically. But Lemony Snicket has a lot to answer for anyway, so we're good.
There is a question in the Q&A I desperately want Ollie to answer.
Yeah, I was about to say that. Do you want to do the honors, Cass?
If you could do a fashion mandate for every Friday, what would it be?
A fashion mandate for every Friday. Oh, what would it be? No, my problem is I would want to do it like Glitterati and have it change. So but what would we start with? What would be the most fabulous thing to have everyone wearing? Well, to begin with, let's abolish gendered clothing. Anyone can wear anything. Let's start from there. And then in Glitterati, the first Friday is neon. So why not? Let's start with neon and work from there. Everyone will be blinding. It will be cars won't be able to drive anywhere because it'll just be reflecting off of people. There's a good place.
Gorgeous, though.
That is, yeah. Okay, there's one last question from Gabe, and because it's from Gabe, I'm gonna slide it in. What is the greatest crime against fashion?
I almost like instinctively said denim off the top of my head, but no, I love denim. That's just coming out of the book.
I always turn up in double denim.
Greatest crime against fashion is transphobia.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. That is a perfect answer.
Okay, we have one last question from Meg, because she's in the next room to me. What would be your Catwalk theme tune, both of you? That's a great question.
I mean, there is an obvious answer here, and that is Dorian Electra's Flamboyant. It's just one of maybe the best Catwalk song ever made.
I have to look that up.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me send you a link.
Yeah.
Dorian is incredible.
I've never thought of this question ever in context of my life. And the first thing that came up to my mind is What's Up Danger from Into the Spider-Verse.
Oh, well, that's nice. Yeah. It sometimes got a good beat to it as well. Like,
I really like that.
Good. Very good question. Okay, I think that's all we have time for, because we've got 2 minutes to half past. So I'm going to do a big thank you for everyone watching. And thanks so much to Ollie and to Cassandra and to Tyson Books. And now I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping for what's coming up with Glasgow in 2024. So Satellite is this weekend in Glasgow. So we have a fan table there this weekend. So come say hello to the team if you're about. We've got some super fun events happening at Satellite, including our next hybrid event, which is Glasgow in 2024 with Satellite 7 and Shoreline of Infinity presenting Alba ad Astra, which will be streamed from Satellite on Sunday, the 29th of May at 2:30 British Summer Time. So that's this Sunday. Our next online event is Writing Queer SFF, which Ollie and Cass could very much join in on. And that's going to be with AK Faulkner, GD Penman and Maya McGregor. And that will be the 23rd of June at 7 p.m. In July the 6th at 7 p.m, we'll have John Dodd and Stu Hodson talking new books, novels and novellas. And then over the summer, we're going to have lots of announcements too in the run up to ChiCon 8. So that's Chicago Worldcon in September. So follow us on our socials, Glasgow in 2024, for fun events and all the info. And if you liked this event, then do consider supporting us or volunteering with us if you want to help build a Worldcon. So yeah, lots of exciting stuff going on with Glasgow in 2024 in the coming months. But yeah, I'm just going to do another big thank you. Any final thoughts from Ollie or Cass to share before we go? And then we'll try and end on time because that's now.
Buy our books, please.
Yes. So Glitterati is with Titan Books. This is available now. And it's like, I honestly cannot recommend it enough. I haven't had this much fun reading in
Glitterati's wonderful.
A long time. And then Cassandra's books also available through Titan. Yeah, please support them. And the audiobooks for both are also available, are they not? Because we like accessibility.
Like, Glitterati is forthcoming. The rights have been sold, but they're taking their time. Obviously, they're spending a long time finding exactly the right voice actor for it.
Could it be
Ollie, why are you not doing it?
Why not you?
Because clearly they want like John Waters or somebody even more fabulous, you know. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, brilliant. Support Glasgow in 2024 and buy Ollie and Cass's books. Thank you all so much for coming. Have a lovely evening and stay fabulous. And strut down the street tomorrow in your best clothes.